Now, at this time, I'm going to share with you what's on my mind. I'm going to warn you before I start. If you're tired, you will probably be sleeping by the end. This is not a short Devar Torah at all. And it is a lot of facts and stuff that we need to know today. Because I am hoping and praying that Nisan, which will start this week, will bring the end, final end to the war by defeating Hamas once and for all. So now you need to understand what I want to say. And it starts by reading the Torah reading today. We find Aharon, the Kohen Gadol's two sons, Nadav and Avihu, doing something differently than God had prescribed. And this was on their very first day of the job as Kohanim. So what happened? They died while performing the sacrificial rite in a very strange way. It's hard to understand. Instead of the fire going up to heaven, it came down from heaven. So when their father saw the remains of his two sons, because the fire burned them to ash, he remained silent. He said nothing. Later that same day, Aharon's other two sons, also Kohanim, Elazar and Itamar, also did something wrong. They made a mistake, but apparently not as egregious as what Nadav and Avihu did. Because this time God did nothing. But Moshe scolded them without mercy. He gave them hell. In both situations, Aaron said nothing. He stood completely silent. It was Moshe who spoke to set the record straight. Why did Aharon remain silent and Moshe did not? Aaron could have said something, but it probably would have been exclaiming his anger with God or with Moshe, and he might have said something to try and excuse his sons so he could feel better himself. Instead, in order not to say something that would misrepresent the actual events, he stayed silent. You know, I wish the press, the international press, would learn that lesson. But there are times when we should act like Moshe, and we must speak out and say our piece. When we watch the news coming out of Israel and Gaza, we see some of the most horrible images imaginable, and it seems that every day it gets worse. The press makes it look worse. We see families being ripped apart, and we see people crying out for help. This is true for both sides, the Israelis and the Gazans, but much more for the Gazans. When seeing these images, the press goes out of its way to focus on the alleged and unverified tens of thousands of casualties on the Palestinian side. They now say over 33,000 Palestinians were killed. But the press never fails to mention that Israel is the stronger combatant with its Army, Air Force, Navy, and its tanks and high-tech weapons. They make sure to show us the poor people in Gaza carrying their belongings on their donkeys and camels. When we see those very moving pictures and images and videos, it's so easy to understand why people feel bad and take the pro-Palestinian side. This is what the media wants people to conclude and to do. I don't know why, but that's it. The truth is that Israel's military is much stronger than that of the Palestinians. It is also true that the Palestinians suffer more casualties. It's a fact. Hamas most likely greatly exaggerates the number of their casualties. Everybody thinks that. But frankly, if even one innocent person is injured or killed on either side, is that already not too many? I mean, isn't that already too many? Of course it is. One person that's innocent killed is too many. 33,000? Give me a break. The thing is, even though there are more casualties on the Palestinian side, since when has casualty count defined the way to measure the virtue of a conflict? Since when? Look, we should all feel bad when innocent Palestinians who are not connected to Hamas or any other terrorist organization gets hurt or killed. I'm certain that most Israelis feel the same way. We never see Israelis celebrating on the streets when the Palestinian casualty count goes up. We never see it. We never see Israelis handing out candy on the streets when the Palestinian casualty count goes up like Hamas does. We never see a Jewish community anywhere on the planet celebrating when the Palestinian casualty count goes up. Never. Hamas does. The anti-Israeli and the pro-Palestinian people do. We don't do it because it's not in our Jewish DNA to do it. Why? Because we actually have an answer to that question. The Tanakh, our Jewish Bible, makes it clear that we should not. But believe me, if it ever did happen, if we ever did it, even if it was less than a handful of Jews, the media would make that into the biggest headline story, that the Jewish people are celebrating as the Gazans die. So if Israelis are such good and moral people, why are there so many Palestinian casualties? One of the reasons is because war is hell. Those of us who have ever been to a war zone, and there are some of us who have been, we don't need an explanation. We've seen it with our own eyes. In wars, accidents happen. Civilians and non-combatants like medical staff, aid workers, and the like sometimes become casualties. This is what regrettably happened just a few days ago to 7 aid workers. But make no mistake about it, there is no justifying the killing of non-combatants, but it is often unavoidable. In this case, the 2 IDF members who did not follow protocol were identified. The 2 members who killed those 7 people were dismissed, and they will be punished. The IDF does not tolerate such behavior in its ranks. Have you ever heard of anything like that in any other military? Another thing that happens in war is that military forces accidentally shoot their own. This is known as friendly fire. No matter how precise Air Force artillery, tanks, drones, and infantry try to be, accidents are unavoidable. That said, the IDF has zero tolerance for ignoring protocol. The IDF is singled out as the one military in the entire world that doesn't just avoid, but goes out of its way to prevent peripheral damage. But as they say, stuff happens. It does not just happen by the IDF. It happens to all military forces in all wars, anywhere they occur. And it always did, and it always will. That's reality. It happens in Kosovo, the Ukraine, Iraq, Afghanistan, Gaza, Syria, and in every military operation, and there were a lot more than I mentioned. It is simply unavoidable. The important thing to note is if we look at the civilian casualty ratio for Israel versus any other military, the IDF's record is measurably and demonstrably way better. Way better. Nobody's close. So any veteran of any war knows that fighting for one's country and for freedom does cost way too much in money and in human treasure. It does. You can't help it. In the case of Israel, it is fighting for its existence. Israel is fighting to preserve a democratic and free Jewish state for anyone who chooses to live there. And I mean anyone, not just Jews, anyone. So I have to ask you, what noble thing is Hamas fighting to preserve? What? I have no idea. So contrast that with how the terrorist forces of Hamas and Hezbollah behave. They intentionally fire missiles directly into civilian communities several times every single day, including today. Who else but Hamas ever entered a music festival and raped, killed, and mutilated innocent civilians who came together to enjoy life? Who? Name one. They kidnapped innocent people from the elderly to the infants. They beheaded men, women, and children. They also beheaded and cut off the arms and legs of little infants in their cribs. Who else did that? They used dull knives to cut the breasts off mothers so they could not nurse their babies. These are not human beings. They do this. Okay, they do it. That's bad. In fact, that's terrible. It's horrific. But it might even be worse because they brag about it. They know that after a few weeks, the world will forget all that as soon as the IDF would accidentally kill civilians and non-combatants. They wait for this. They tee it up for that. They know the media will always cry foul and always paint Israel as the big bad aggressor. They know it. Almost every government would react to the media's pressure and gang up on Israel. They plan this. They know this. This is how they live their lives. They demand, and then the world would demand a ceasefire, which is happening right now. In fact, our own president threatened Netanyahu that they're not going to get anything else from us, no more weapons, nothing, if they don't do a ceasefire. This is a documented thing from a phone call. I think it was 2 days ago on Thursday. I can say without any doubt in my mind that Hamas, Hezbollah, and the other Islamic terrorists that are funded by Iran are all motivated not for good, but by their love for death. I'm not just saying this as an opinion. This is not an opinion that they love death. How do I know it's a fact? These poor excuses of human beings not only declare it, they brag about it. They love death. They say that they will win because they love death more than Israelis love life. They say that. Israelis say the opposite. Israelis say they will win because Jews love life more than Hamas loves death. This is one hell of a way to put on a war. Good against evil, evil against good. In the Hamas constitution, it says in their constitution that jihad is the path and those who give their lives for Allah will yield the greatest reward. Those who give their lives for Allah will yield the greatest reward. And in Israel, in the Israeli Declaration of Independence, it says that Israel extends its hand to all neighboring states and their peoples. The difference is anything but subtle. It's death versus life. We should know that when Westerners say that the reason Palestinians love death more than life is because they are poor and have nothing. They say that they are living under such harsh conditions because of Israelis' policies. The entire Christian organizations say that. Sorry, folks, but that is a great lie perpetrated by none other than the Palestinians, the Iranians, those people that are loving death. They don't care about that. And anyone who believes that has no connection with the truth whatsoever. Israel is not the cause of the problem. The Palestinian leadership keeps their subjects in abject poverty, with their leaders being billionaires. While Israeli companies hire Palestinians all the time, it's quite common. Hamas, not Israel, tax them at such high rates. These workers remain in poverty while enriching their leaders. How is that Israel's fault? Tell me. The absolute truth is that Palestinians are taught from childhood, from their youngest ages where they can comprehend anything. They're taught to believe in jihad. By the way, jihad isn't just against Jews. Jews are first, then come the Christians, then come the Hindus. So when the media talks about the hundreds of children dead in Gaza, you know what? I don't know if you watch that, but it's always the same little girl. They always show the same kids. They never segment the 16 to 17-year-old Hamas terrorist combatants who die in combat. They never tell you about them. Instead, they count them as children and as innocents. We are only shown anything that fits the sick, perverted narrative that Hamas wants us to hear. That's all we ever hear. We must never forget that Hamas and Hezbollah hide their military personnel, their armament, and their missiles in schools, hospitals, and civilian neighborhoods. The media ignores that and highlights the civilian casualties caused by Israel's warmongers. They do mention it, but it's always in passing. On the other hand, Israel's Iron Dome and air defense systems intercept the daily barrage of missiles aimed at the civilians that Hamas and Hezbollah are purposely trying to maim and kill. Media never mentions that Hamas and Hezbollah want to purposely kill Israeli civilians. They never say that. And when Israel is accused of killing civilians, it is above the fold on the first page of the paper. And when it turns out the initial reportage is incorrect, the correction is buried somewhere deep within the paper. You know, as I already said, Hamas stores missiles in buildings where there are civilians. Does the media ever report that when Israel identifies these sites, and many Jews don't even know this, instead of bombing the building right away, Israel does something that is called knocking on the roof. What is that? Israel shoots a few rounds at the roof to let the people inside know it is not safe to stay. Only after giving the civilians an ample chance to evacuate does the IDF bomb the target. Does the media report this? No, it doesn't. Why? It contradicts their message that Israel is the world's pariah that bullies the Palestinians. The Islamic terrorists are positioned as victims. I am not sure when it happened, but the Western media has favored victims. Whether they're right or wrong, they favor and they push victims. They often define the aggressor as the victim. and the victim as the aggressor. Does it make any sense to ascribe virtue to strength or weakness? Virtue should be determined solely by behavior. The media successfully sells the argument, and perhaps I shouldn't say argument, I should say lie, blatant, bald-faced lie, that the Palestinians are so weak. They have no other option than to act as they do because they are David facing Goliath. And they are no match for the United States, which they call Big Satan, and Israel they call Little Satan. I got to tell you something. Go back in history a little bit, 1945 to 1948. There was an organization called the Palmach, a paramilitary Jewish fighting force that fought the British. They would break into British military bases to steal weapons. They blew up bridges and railways that were military targets. What they did not do was to rape British women. They did not kill British children. They did not kill British civilians. They didn't behead infants in their cribs. They didn't cut the breasts off the women. No, the small, much less powerful Jewish organization that fought the mighty and strong British Empire had no desire to kill non-combatants and civilians. They had no desire. They loved life, not death. The Jewish fighting forces may have been weak, but they were moral. In fact, virtue could also have been applied to both Jewish and British forces. Neither were monsters. We just didn't agree with the British. That sometimes is what causes wars. But there are historians out there that I'm sure that are listening here that remember that on July 22nd, 1946, the organization called Irgun Tzvi Leumi, which was an armed Jewish force who opposed Britain's continued rule of Palestine, bombed Jerusalem's award-winning King David Hotel. The anti-Semites out there never forgot it. And they argue that this proves that the Jews are not as moral as I'm suggesting today. In fact, it is easy to conclude that this act was no different than what Hamas does. Now, there's two things I'd like to say about that. The first is, what they don't tell you is, the King David Hotel was being used as the main headquarters of the British Army. It wasn't being used by civilians. It was being used as the main headquarters of the British Army. And that made the King David Hotel a legitimate military target. It was not a hospital. It was not a school. It was not plain homes where civilians lived. It was not housing a music festival and the like. The IDF, just like the IDF, the Irgun gave fair warning before their attack as well. And when the British commander received this warning, do you know what he said? Nothing. And then, when he was asked why he said nothing or did nothing, he answered, "I don't take orders from Jews." Now, there's another reason. I said there were two reasons. There are always exceptions to every rule. And as I said earlier, unintentional stuff happens because war is. But I'm neither saying now nor have I ever claimed that we Jews are perfect. I remember a few years ago an ultra-Orthodox Jew murdered a teenage girl at a gay parade in Jerusalem. Does this give us the right to say that all ultra-Orthodox Jews will kill other Jews who do not believe as they do? Of course not. Taking this further, Does it mean that it is dangerous to be gay in Israel? Well, ironically, today, as we sit here and listen, the LGBTQ plus are safer in Israel than they are right here in the good old USA. However, it is also true that Palestinian civilians have been personally attacked by Israelis. It's true. But these events are thankfully very rare. Not only that, but the people who do it, the Israelis who do that, are arrested and severely punished by the Israeli justice system for their crimes. So contrast that with Hamas and the other Palestinian organizations who have attacked Jewish civilians before and since the State of Israel was established. Purposely attacking civilians is against international law. But because the media views weakness as a virtue, the murderous terrorists get a pass every time. So as I said, terrorists love death. Their purpose is to kill anyone and everyone who is not like them. That's their purpose. That's why they're terrorists. If some of their own die when killing Jews, their families are not punished. They're paid a ransom. They're paid for this. They are also told that they will receive great rewards in the afterlife, and we've all heard about those. If this does not highlight how naive the West is, what in God's name does? Western morons continue to send money to those beasts, believing the lie that it will lessen their hatred and bring peace because they'll have more food to eat. What the media does not report is that more money and more support doesn't do that. These cretins get it. They don't get most of the food. They don't get most of the supplies. It's used to build more weapons, rockets, and tunnels for the purpose of spreading more death. We all see there's so much food and supplies going into Gaza now, and it's in stockpiles. They are only getting a little bit of it. It's all stockpile. What are they going to do with it? They're going to sell it. So when is the world going to learn that the chickens will not give milk just because they are fed hay? Chickens will not give milk just because they are fed hay. By the way, in spite of what we are being told, Hamas is hardly a small organization at all. It is part of a huge movement called the Muslim Brotherhood, which enjoys hundreds of millions of supporters in the Islamic world. We've all heard of the Muslim Brotherhood, but nobody ever tells us what it is. It's huge. Millions. Does the media ever tell us this? No. It constantly focuses on that little group called Hamas or Hezbollah. They're not so little, but they're not millions. They don't tell you there are really millions behind them. And the other Islamic terrorist group, they're all segmented as little, small, weak organizations so that the world feels sorry for them. Does anyone know what percentage of Palestinian support Hamas has? We don't. We don't know why. Because they don't hold elections. We don't know how they would vote. We can assume, but we don't know. More importantly, the press never even tries to find out because they fear the answer will contradict the huge pile of road apples it wants us to believe. All Palestinians, even those who do not support Hamas, hold some responsibility for the situation in which they find themselves. Even today in Germany, it is unacceptable. I don't know if you know this. It's unacceptable to say that the Nazis were only a small group of 37%, so technically the bad guys were only a minority. You can't say that in Germany. It's just not politically accepted. Nobody can say that. It is also unacceptable to say that most of the Germans were really nice, normal people, and only the Nazis who worked in the death camps were responsible for the Holocaust. Nobody in their right mind would say that in Germany. or anywhere. The reason it is not acceptable is because the Germans know that it is not true. Did all the Germans kill Jews and Russian prisoners of war? Of course not. But they all shared responsibility because the silent majority was afraid to speak, afraid to say anything or do anything against the thugs that were running the country. It's no different for the Palestinians. It's no different. I cannot drive this message home any harder. The West treats the Palestinians with kid gloves. The media portrays them as being victims of circumstance. To the contrary, the Palestinians brought Hamas on themselves. They support Hamas and is educated in its values of war and death. So why is Israel blamed for this? How can you blame Israel for this? All right, when watching the news from Gaza, we must remember that Hamas has more control over what we see than does Israel. It's a fact. The BBC website highlights hundreds of videos sent from Hamas. Watch as many as time permits, or as you can stand, and point me to a single video in which a Gazan criticizes Hamas. Isn't that suspicious? Perhaps it is also the fault of the journalists on the ground who never ask them any hard questions at all. Not one. There is never a question about the way Hamas treats them. I did see one interview on NBC News where a Palestinian started to say they wish Hamas could provide more food and shelter. But that person was quickly cut off by the reporter, the NBC reporter, who interrupted and asked how much better things would be if, and I quote, the aggression coming from Israel, unquote, would stop. I got to ask you, is this journalism? In our country, some journalists treat liberals and some conservatives the same way. They don't let them talk. And they shut them down and they call them names and they try to twist everything. Is that really how journalism is taught in the colleges and universities today? On the other hand, finding an Israeli who criticizes their government doesn't take any effort at all. We can easily find Israelis saying that they wish the government would resign, not because of the crisis, which they say would have happened under any government, but because of how it has been unsuccessful in freeing the hostages. Or other things. Israelis will argue and complain about everything. But getting back to the main theme of the Devar Torah, why are there so many Palestinian non-combatant casualties? There is no doubt that we will eventually learn that the reported numbers will never be validated. Ironically, we get so many erroneous stories given to the press from Hamas because Israel makes it as safe as possible for the journalists to be in the region. It's Israel that makes it safe for them. Israel is a democracy, and it ensures that anyone can stand in Jerusalem and in Tel Aviv and anywhere else in Israel, including in Gaza and Judea and Samaria, and criticize Israel. So in closing, I want to share with you something that a grandmother of the Hamas murdered 22-year-old Shani Luke, her grandmother, Nicole Luke Nachash, wrote. I'm sorry I have to read this, but it's so appropriate. My dead granddaughter stars in a photograph that won a prestigious photography competition, and the world is silent. The body of my granddaughter, after she was brutally murdered and taken to Gaza as a sign of victory, is displayed for all to see, and the world is silent. My granddaughter's body, after the vile murderers broke her bones to get her to fit in the back of the van, this body that was only a few hours ago full of life, love, and light, tossed as a victory trophy for terrorists and vile photographers, and the world is silent. My beautiful dead granddaughter, surrounded by 3 bloodthirsty murderers. This is the heroic photo that was chosen first in a prestigious photography competition, and the world is silent. And I'm screaming, could you? And when in the history of photography did a photo of a corpse win a prize? And how much more pain can we contain? 3 men shouting Allah and Akbar, 1 vile photographer, and my shattered granddaughter, and the world is silent. And the world is silent. And the world is silent. With that, I'm going to say Shabbat Shalom, Am Yisrael Chai, and perhaps it's time to act like Moshe and speak out loudly and forcefully. This is no time to act like Aaron.